Thanks to my friends over at kicks.com.au, I'm pleased to offer you an incredibly special promo code which you can use to get 10% off all Blu-rays, 4Ks and DVDs store-wide. And even better, it's stackable on top of sale stock too. Just use Dave10 at checkout for the discount to apply. Code expires end of September 2020.
Hey, we still got time to make the game, Barney. How about it, girls? Can we go?
Sure. If they take us.
Yabba-dabba-doo! Come on, girls. The Brontosaurus bikers are on me.
The Flintstones are the fan-favourite creations of Hanna-Barbera, debuting on ABC as the first ever primetime cartoon series in 1960. Remaining on the air for 6 seasons and a total of 166 episodes, breaking ground every step of the way, the original series remained the single most successful television cartoon for 3 decades. Continuing in syndication for over 50 years as one of the top-rated syndicated series in history, it has spawned 8 spin-off series, 1 theatrical animated film, 17 telemovies and specials, and 2 live-action theatrical films, remaining one of the most beloved cartoon franchises of all time. The Flintstones solidified Hanna-Barbera as a leader in the animation industry, and was noted as being the first time that everybody could admit that cartoons were for everybody, by ex-Hanna-Barbera president Fred Siebert. Despite being the bedrock for all cartoon sitcoms that have followed, inspiring the likes of The Simpsons, Family Guy, American Dad, and King of the Hill, The Flintstones has sadly struggled to find its audience in recent times. In 2020, The Flintstones turns 60 years old, and to celebrate, I will trace their entire evolution, right from 1960 to now. To do so, I will spotlight the various series iterations, touching on changes in character and animation style, and the thematic and structural shifts prevalent across 6 decades of series and films. In this edition of Yabba Dabba Cartoon Evolution! By the mid-1950s, television had become the most popular and convenient form of visual entertainment. With audiences turning their backs on cinemas, theatre chains were rejecting most new cartoon shorts, instead choosing to repeat classics. When studios realised they were making more money on re-releases, they reduced production numbers and issued budget cuts as large as 80%. With artistry and narrative storytelling affected, many series were ultimately killed prematurely, such as MGM Cartoons' Tom and Jerry, produced by animators William Hanna and Joseph Barbera, which was cancelled in 1957 after almost 20 years. As a result of axing their most popular series, the entire cartoon studio was closed later that year. Soon after, Hanna-Barbera formed their own production company, turning their sights to TV, with, according to Barbera, no other place to go. Partnering with Columbia Pictures' Screen Gems, they released 3 highly popular series in just 2 years, and introduced dozens of popular characters. Hanna-Barbera Productions consequently became the first studio to successfully produce cartoons specifically for TV, beating out industry leaders such as Walt Disney and Warner Brothers by a number of years. With these cartoons running in early time slots and thus appealing predominantly to a children's audience, Screen Gems president John Mitchell, who said they couldn't expect to do animal stories forever, challenged Hanna-Barbera to devise a situation comedy, or sitcom, focused on a couple in the suburbs that could run in prime time and appeal to the whole family, especially adults, much as the classic theatrical shorts did. The duo were initially reluctant, with Barbera saying no one had even dared think about a primetime animated show. Who could do that? Are you kidding? After persistent bugging, they relented and began workshopping a series which parodied popular sitcoms of the era, most obviously The Honeymooners starring Jackie Gleason. The pair decided their send-up of modern life should take place in a period setting and experimented with depicting the characters as Romans, pilgrims, and hillbillies before settling on cavemen. Prehistoric times were not exactly new ground for film. It was an era heavily experimented with in live-action silent comedies and also in animation. In the 1920s, Pat Sullivan's Felix the Cat visited the Stone Age, as did the Looney Tunes in the 1930s and 40s. The Fleischer Studio had even produced Stone Age cartoons, a series which Hanna-Barbera drew enormous inspiration from. In fact, one of the Fleischer series animators, Dan Gordon, was instrumental in developing the characters for Hanna-Barbera's show, with Hanna calling him responsible for the series and crediting him with the basic concept of doing it with cavemen in skins. Another huge inspiration was 1955 MGM short The First Bad Man, produced by Tex Avery, their friendly rival at the studio. Drawing obvious cues from character, costume, and overall artistic design, as well as gag work, they particularly borrowed from the way both series, in the words of animation historian Leonard Moulton, transposed modern mechanical ideas to prehistoric times. The team produced numerous full-length storyboards and a 90-second test reel, essentially a pilot, which they used to shop the concept around to potential networks and agencies. Initially called The Flagstones, the pilot showcased a simple gag setup, focusing on 4 characters, Fred and Wilma Flintstone and Betty and Barney Rubble, who would form the core cast of the eventual program. While characters' names and personalities were essentially the same as their finalized versions, they appeared in somewhat primitive designs. Most notably, Barney appeared shorter and rounder, and Betty hardly resembled her final form at all, wearing a fur coat instead of her blue dress and sporting no bow. Barbera travelled to New York to pitch the program in late 1959, and after 8 weeks of non-stop presentations, he'd gotten absolutely nowhere. Noting that no one wanted to buy a primetime cartoon, he said, "No one would even believe that you dare to suggest a thing like that. They looked at you and they'd think you're crazy." However, as fate would have it, 3 hours before he was set to fly back to LA, he delivered his pitch to executives from ABC. According to Barbera, the then daring young network bought the show in 15 minutes, deciding to take a shot. If they hadn't, he said, "I would have taken everything, put it in a storage and never come back with it. This is how close you come to disaster." Set for release in late 1960, the team got to work developing the show. The characters were remodeled as more appealing, taking on the designs we know today. Additionally, due to Flagstone being too similar to Flagston, the surname of Hi and Lois in Mort Walker's comic strips, the studio mandated a name change to avoid copyright issues. Initially, the Flagstones became the Gladstones, as seen on original model sheets, though ultimately the Gladstones became the Flintstones for unknown reasons soon before release. With the Huckleberry Hound and Quick Draw McGraw shows still in simultaneous production, the addition of the Flintstones meant that Hanna-Barbera were now pumping out more animation in a single week than they used to in an entire year at MGM with less money. In order to reduce the cost of and time spent on each cartoon, they produced their series in a so-called assembly line limited animation style, known as planned animation. This particular process relied on the studio pulling, in Barbera's words, every stop that you can think of to make it move with the least amount of drawings, including various animation and camera tricks. Take note of any time a character walks, their body is still, with small feet and hand movements, while backgrounds play in continuous loops. Additionally, heads simply bob, with necklines covered by collars, neckties, and necklaces. For the Flintstones, planned animation was more important than ever. While their previous series was structured as 30-minute blocks containing a number of 6 to 7 minute shorts mimicking old theatricals, Hanna-Barbera decided that their sitcom needed to present traditional full-length 30-minute storylines. The Flintstones was thus the first ever cartoon series to take on such a format, setting a precedent for those that followed. Additionally, Flintstones was one of the first cartoon series to be given a laugh track, with Screen Gems believing it to be a necessity in making the show a legitimate sitcom. Despite being flabbergasted by the suggestion, Hanna-Barbera conceded, allowing sound engineer Charles Douglas to provide one using his laugh box, a piano-like machine loaded with canned laughs recorded at conventions and carnivals and ripped from old Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis radio shows. Following its use by the Flintstones, laugh tracks became fairly common for animated comedies between the 1960s and early 1980s. Another element that made the Flintstones feel like a true sitcom was its clear influence from the Honeymooners, one of the most popular sitcoms to have ever aired at the time and one of the first to comment on the lives of working-class married couples. Running between 1955 and 1956, the series focused on the exploits of the loud, proud, ill-tempered yet kind-hearted Ralph Cramton and his dim-witted best pal and fall guy, Ed Norton. Often getting caught up in harebrained schemes and silly feuds, the pair pair continuously landed in trouble with their strong-willed, quick-witted and sarcastic wives, Alice and Trixie. Sound familiar? While the Honeymooners pioneered the obnoxious family man formula seen in a plethora of sitcoms, its influence has, perhaps, never been so evident than it was on The Flintstones. So much so, series star and creator Jackie Gleason allegedly considered suing Hanna-Barbera, though ultimately decided against it in fear of being known as the guy who yanked Fred Flintstone off the air. While Barbera was reluctant to draw comparisons, saying, "I don't remember mentioning the Honeymooners when I sold the show," Hanna admitted that it influenced Flintstones greatly, even saying it was used as a kind of basis for the concept. The Flintstones' overall premise, story structures, situations and gags are inarguably heavily derivative of the Honeymooners, though Barbera noted that while Honeymooners excelled at verbal humour, Flintstones did so on visual gags or window dressing, such as the prehistoric versions of modern-day appliances. The characters and their relationship dynamics were outrageously similar too, as were their voices. In the words of Wilma voice actress Jean Vanderpyle, the actors ended up doing almost impressions of their respective influences. Hers was of course Audrey Meadows' Alice, while Alan Reed took up the role of Fred, based on Gleason's Ralph.
I know you're about to start in again on another one of your crazy harebrained schemes.
And I've got one for you. I don't want any trouble.
That'd be a nice thing, wouldn't it? After all she's done for him, pleading for him to come home and him laughing at her.
You think I'd make trouble for my bosom buddy, close friend, and lifelong pal? Is that what you're intimating?
Mel Blanc as Barney refused to imitate Aunt Carney's Ed at first, though relented in the second season.
Bodio dose 23 skidoo. I'll kiss you later. I'm eating potato.
I gotta hand it to you, Fred. When you get an idea, you don't waste any time.
However, Betty's voice, provided by two voice actresses over time, Bea Benaderet and Jerry Johnson, was more generic, given that Trixie was a less utilised and less familiar character. When The Flintstones premiered on September 30, 1960, it was widely scorned by critics. Variety called it a pen and ink disaster, and it was branded a dreadful show by Show Business Illustrated. Columnist Hal Humphrey was kinder, saying he found it mildly funny. Many critiques were aimed at the show's use of limited animation and canned laughter, and for essentially ripping off the Honeymooners. Audiences, however, loved the program. The Saturday Evening Post, who called it TV's most unexpected hit, wrote of the audience, "If it all sounds and looks like a prehistoric version of the Honeymooners, nobody seems to care." The show was an instant success, ranking as the 18th most popular program in its debut season, with 14 million households tuning in. Just as the producers hoped, The Flintstones were wildly popular with adults, who found its cutting-edge satire on modern life not only relatable, but unlike anything they had ever seen in cartoons. Simply because it was a cartoon, it was also a hit with children. Hanna-Barbera jokingly said that kids used it as a good excuse to stay up late on a Friday night, though Hanna more honestly attributed the widespread success to kind of lucking out. Despite early criticism, the first season was nominated for a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Comedy Series, remaining the only cartoon to be nominated in the category until Family Guy almost 50 years later in 2009. Despite its setting, The Flintstones was one of the most modern, realistic, and honest sitcoms to ever hit the airwaves. Hanna-Barbera historian Scott Shaw noted Bedrock was a direct analogue of whatever was going on in America, while the Museum of Broadcast Communications in Chicago noted that the way the characters faced the problems of contemporary working-class life added to its popularity. Likewise, animation historian Jerry Beck further said, "We could see ourselves through that show." The series remained so popular that it ran for a total of 166 episodes over 6 seasons between 1960 and 1966, and was the longest running and single most financially successful cartoon TV series ever until it was overtaken by The Simpsons more than 30 years later in 1997. Not only did the characters and stories enter the pop culture lexicon, but so did Fred's iconic catchphrase. a supposed ad-lib by Alan Reed, who said it instead of the scripted Yahoo in a recording session. Reed said the phrase was inspired by the classic Brill Cream slogan,
"With Brill Cream, a little dab'll do you,"
which his mother often said. Likewise, the show's theme song, Meet The Flintstones, became one of the most recognizable television theme songs ever, following its introduction in the 3rd season, after the original theme was deemed too similar to that of The Bugs Bunny Show. With a plethora of merchandise hitting shelves throughout the 60s and 70s, The Flintstones was a cultural phenomenon and a multi-million-dollar marketing machine. In 1968, Miles Laboratories introduced Flintstones chewable vitamins, which remain one of America's most recognizable and best-selling over-the-counter pharmaceuticals, and according to the brand's website are the #1 pediatrician-recommended vitamin brand for kids. Additionally, in 1971, Cocoa Pebbles and Fruity Pebbles, inspired by the Flintstones, became the first cereal brand to be built around existing IP, likewise remaining a best-selling cereal in America. The late 60s and early 70s also saw the opening of 2 Flintstones theme parks known as Bedrock City, located in South Dakota and Arizona. While the Arizona park was open until late 2019, albeit in a state of disrepair, the South Dakota park closed in 2015. With such a large stamp on the culture, Flintstones also revolutionized the idea of celebrity guests in cartoons. Anne Margaret and Tony Curtis visited Bedrock as Anne Margrock and Stony Curtis, and Elizabeth Montgomery and Dick York appeared as their characters from ABC's live-action sitcom Bewitched in an early example of TV cross-promotion. Thanks to the Flintstones, by the late 1960s, Hanna-Barbera was the largest producer of animated films in Hollywood, with more and more programs following in its wake. In 1962, the studio launched The Jetsons, a second primetime series often described as the Flintstones' space-age counterpart or sister show. Jetsons likewise parodied modern life but in a futuristic setting. In Barbera's words, the same thing but in the future. In its own right, The Jetsons is itself one of Hanna-Barbera's most beloved shows, but that is a story for another time. Over its 6-year run, character designs modified only slightly. The first season was, of course, the most primitive, featuring incredibly simplistic characters with thick, inky outlines. The second saw them become more refined, with more detail on faces and clothing. Between seasons 3 and 6, very little changes were all that evident, though characters did appear to become slowly more angular over time, especially the females. From season 4 onward, the animation appeared quite polished, with smoother and cleaner lines and details. A strange design oddity that did occur in the final season was Barney's eyes changing from clear round circles to solid black dots, much like Wilma's. The overall visual design also changed only slightly. Background art was likewise incredibly simplistic in the first season, and slowly became more detailed and less stylized, though remaining somewhat surrealist. Throughout the 6 seasons, the show retained its limited process, never moving from what had become an inherently recognizable signature style, not only for the show itself, but for Hanna-Barbera cartoons as a whole. However, the biggest evolution for the show was its gradual demographic shift. While the first 2 seasons maintained groundbreaking, edgy adult humor, this was slowly watered down due to growing popularity with a younger demographic and the series' enormous marketing potential with them. Initially sponsored by Winston cigarettes, with integrated commercials at the end of every episode depicting the characters smoking, the most obvious indicator that times had changed was the sponsorship shift to the more family-friendly Welchers, whose integrations instead saw them spruiking grape juice and jellies. The sponsor change in fact happened to correlate with the arrival of the Flintstones' newborn daughter, Pebbles, who was introduced through the series' first multi-episode story arc. There had been plans to give Fred and Wilma a son during the series' early development, and the character of Fred Jr. even appeared in a Little Golden Book, commissioned and released before the series premiere. At the suggestion of Barbera's wife Sheila, the idea was revived at a time when the producers were looking for ways to keep the show fresh. When Hanna-Barbera's merchandiser caught wind of the plans, they called Barbera to ask what gender the baby would be. Barbera's response was, "What else? It's a boy, a chip off the old rock. Fred Jr." Considering boy dolls weren't big sellers, the merchandiser disappointingly replied, "Too bad. We had the ideal toy people interested, and if it was a girl, we could have made a hell of a deal. We could really clean up." Barbera quickly replied, "It is a girl. Pebbles was thus not only the first baby to be born in a cartoon TV series, but also the first character specifically introduced into cartoons as a merchandising tie-in. A new form of marketing still common today was thus revolutionized when 3 million Pebble dolls sold within 2 months. A baby boy was of course introduced to the Flintstones cast the following season, with Bam Bam joining the Rubble clan. Bam Bam was designed as a cuter, more refined version of Ubble Ubble, a short-term recurring cave boy character from Rough and Ready, who could say nothing other than his name.
Ubble, 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 ubble.
Much like Bam Bam. And likewise arrived to the series in a multi-episode arc, which saw Barney and Betty adopting the child. The Flintstones then became the first cartoon series to discuss infertility. Similarly, as a side note, the series was also the first cartoon to depict a husband and wife sleeping in the same bed together, and one of the first television series to do so overall. Unfortunately, following the shift in demographic, which substituted edgy humour with juvenile gags, the show's adult viewers, who had made it so popular in the first place, drifted away. Series ratings dropped steadily with each passing season, to the point that in its 6th, it only ranked as the 70th most watched program, leading ABC to pull the plug. Immediately following the cancellation, Hanna-Barbera began production on a feature-length film to act as the series finale, which opened theatrically in mid-1966 to generally positive reception. Titled The Man Called Flintstone, a clear parody of that year's hit spy comedy Our Man Flint, the film was a spoof of the incredibly popular James Bond franchise. It featured character designs fairly similar to those in the show's 6th season, though backgrounds took on a more detailed, dimensional look. Despite still using limited animation, movement also appeared smoother and more refined. The Flintstones went into almost immediate syndication, and the characters regularly appeared in television commercials. By the early 1970s, audience appetite for more Flintstones was so high, numerous spin-offs, revivals, and specials began releasing, and did so almost constantly over the next 3 decades, most of which featured the same character designs and trademark limited animation. The first spin-off was 1971's The Pebbles and Bamm-Bamm Show, which was the first Flintstone series produced for a morning slot, much like most of those that followed, and the first for CBS. The series focused on the titular characters as teenagers following their exploits growing up. Aimed at young teens, the series featured modern pop music and even saw the characters form a band called the Bedrock Rockers, possibly an attempt to capitalize on the Archies craze of the era. While Fred, Barney, Wilma, and Betty did appear in the series, they did so only sporadically in minor roles. It ran for a season of 16 episodes. Following in 1972 was the Flintstone Comedy Hour, a package block featuring a variety of Flintstones-inspired segments. The first half hour showcased new Pebbles and Bamm-Bamm shorts, as well as new Fred and Barney shorts. The second half hour was reserved for reruns of Pebbles and Bamm-Bamm episodes, with 4 unaired episodes additionally running. After 18 shows, the series, minus the Pebbles and Bamm-Bamm episodes, was rerun and rebranded in 1973 as The Flintstone Comedy Show. Shorts from the series were once again re-aired between 1977 and 1978 as part of the Fred Flintstone and Friends package program, alongside other Hanna-Barbera series such as Goober and the Ghost Chasers, Genie, Yogi's Gang, and the Jetsons-esque Partridge Family 2200 AD. In 1977, Fred and Wilma appeared in Energy, a national issue, an educational film narrated by Charlton Heston, which was distributed to schools on 16mm film and also aired as a syndicated TV special. Telling the history of energy over time, Fred and Wilma travel through various post-prehistoric ages in a variety of designs, including a then-modern style. While character animation in the special was fairly smooth, backgrounds were incredibly simplistic. The short is notable for featuring the final performance of Alan Reed as Fred before his death that year. Soon after, the Flintstones returned to prime time in a trio of classic 60-minute specials produced for NBC, now starring Henry Corden as Fred. 1977's A Flintstones Christmas saw Fred and Barney taking the role of Santa Claus in a now classic Christmas special. 1978's Little Big League saw the pair coaching opposing Little League baseball teams. And 1979's The Flintstones Meet Rockula and and Frankenstone saw the duo accidentally waking the monster Frankenstone at Count Rockula's castle in Rocksylvania. Despite still being of a limited nature, the animation on these specials was significantly better than any prior series, and the style was adopted by future Flintstones productions. 1979 also saw the launch of the new Fred and Barney show on NBC, which was essentially the first revival series of the Flintstones in its original format, though with a supernatural element which saw the characters going up against witches, werewolves, and other monsters. After running for 17 episodes, NBC re-aired them in the Fred and Barney Meet The Thing block, alongside newly animated episodes of Marvel's The Thing. Following this, the series was rerun once more between 1979 and 1980 as Fred and Barney Meet the Shmoo, with an additional program, Lil Abner's The New Shmoo, added to the roster. 1980 saw another new Flintstone series debut on NBC, known as The Flintstone Comedy Show in the USA and Flintstone Frolics internationally. Taking the form of a package series, the episodes were comprised of various short segments. Flintstone Family Adventures was a short-form revival of the original Flintstones format. Bedrock Cops saw Fred and Barney as part-time police officers alongside their new partner, the Shmoo, fighting crime in Bedrock. Pebbles, Dino and Bamm-Bamm saw early teen versions of the two children alongside the Flintstones' pet dinosaur Dino fighting crime in Bedrock, utilizing the mystery-solving teens and a pet formula that had sprung from the popularity of Hanna-Barbera's Scooby-Doo. Dino and Cave Mouse was a Tom and Jerry inspired segment supervised by Tex Avery, which saw Dino chasing a cave mouse around the Flintstones' home. And the Frankenstones introduced a family who were a monster mashup of the Flintstones and the Munsters, another popular sitcom family of the mid-1960s. Additionally, Hanna-Barbera favourite Captain Caveman also starred in his own segment. The series ran for 18 episodes across 2 seasons until it was rerun as The Flintstone Funnies between 1982 and 1984. In the interim, another quartet of Flintstone primetime specials aired between 1980 and 1981, including The Flintstones' New Neighbour, Fred's Final Fling, Wind Up Wilma, and Jogging Fever. These took on a 30-minute time slot and were designed as a limited run revival of the original series, complete with edgy adult humour. They were the final Flintstones to feature a laugh track and the final new episodes produced for NBC. The series returned to ABC in 1986 as The Flintstone Kids, capitalising on the then popular babyfication format, presenting the characters in youthful designs. The series was popular with children and ran between 1986 and 1988 for 34 episodes, and spawned a 30-minute primetime special in 1988 called Just Say No, designed to teach kids to say no to drugs. In 1987, 90-minute telemovie The Jetsons Meet The Flintstones aired as part of the Hanna-Barbera Superstars 10 telemovie series. It saw the Stone Age family finally meeting their Space Age counterparts who accidentally travel back in time in a malfunctioning time machine. The Jetsons find themselves stuck in the past while the Flintstones end up sent into the future, and both families are left struggling to get back to their respective times in a time-hopping journey likely inspired by Back to the Future, an enormous box office hit 2 years prior. Jetsons Meet Flintstones was well received and remains a fan favourite. 1993 saw a trilogy of Flintstone stories air on ABC, beginning with 90-minute telemovie I Yabba Dabba Doo, inspired by another box office hit, 1991's Father of the Bride, a remake of the 1950 film of the same name. The movie acted as a spin-off of the Pebbles and Bamm-Bamm show and saw the two as adults preparing for marriage. A 90-minute sequel, Holly Rockabye Baby, followed later in the year and saw the characters expecting their first children, twins Roxy and Chip. While a sequel to Father of the Bride was released in 1995 with a similar premise, this telemovie was instead based on the 1951 film Father's Little Dividend, the sequel to the original Father of the Bride. A third and final sequel, 30-minute TV special A Flintstone Family Christmas, aired a few weeks later and depicted Roxy and Chip's first Christmas. The film marked the final appearance of the adult form Pebbles and Bamm-Bamm and their children. While featuring simplistic animation, it's clear moving into the 1990s, Hanna-Barbera were trying to move as far away from limited animation as possible, with animation here on after appearing less rigid and more fluid and detailed. In 1994, ABC aired another Christmas special, A Flintstones Christmas Carol, which saw the Flintstones appearing in their very own version of Charles Dickens' classic novel. Fred, of course, was placed in the role of Ebenezer Scrooge, Barney was seen as Bob Crackit, Betty as Mrs. Crackit, Pebbles as Martha Crackit, Bam-Bam as Tiny Tim, Wilma as the ghost of Christmas past, and Dino as the ghost of Christmas yet to come. That same year, the characters also saw their very first foray into live action, with theatrical feature The Flintstones, produced by Steven Spielberg. Described by director Brian Levant as a sitcom on steroids, the film took major inspiration from the original series, particularly in its character depictions and adult-focused themes and humor, despite being marketed as a family film. It starred John Goodman as Fred, Rick Moranis as Barney, Elizabeth Perkins as Wilma, and Rosie O'Donnell as Betty. It additionally starred Halle Berry, Carl McLachlan, and Elizabeth Taylor. Jim Henson's Creature Shop was hired to provide practical effects for dinosaurs and the primitive modern conveniences, with ILM providing CGI effects following their work on 1993's Jurassic Park. While the film was praised for its visual design and casting choices, many critics slammed it for being unfunny and too adult. Barbera even noted, "The story wasn't as good as I could have made it." Regardless, it was an enormous hit, becoming the fourth biggest film of 1994, raking in $341 million at the box office on a $46 million budget, and is considered a cult classic by fans today. The film's success spawned a plethora of animation to live action adaptations over the next decade, and a prequel film, 2000's The Flintstones in Viva Rock Vegas, telling how the characters first met. It starred Mark Addy as Fred, Stephen Baldwin as Barney, Kristen Johnson as Wilma, Jane Krakowski as Betty, and Alan Cumming as the Great Gazoo, a recurring character from the original series' final season. Unfortunately, with a more kid-friendly tone, it couldn't replicate the success of the first, taking a box office loss, making only $59.9 million on an $83 million budget. In the early 1990s, Hanna-Barbera was bought out by Warner Brothers in an attempt to bulk up their animation offering before launching Cartoon Network, the first 24-hour animation channel. As the first Flintstones cartoons produced for the station, 2 Dino short films aired as part of the 1995 anthology series What a Cartoon. Stay Out aired in 1995, and The Great Eggscape aired in 1997. Designed to mimic 7-minute theatrical shorts, they were the first of their kind in the franchise. In 1996, the short-lived Cave Kids debuted on Cartoon Network, lasting only 8 episodes. The series focused on the toddler versions of Pebbles and Bamm-Bamm, off on adventures with Dino, and likewise didn't star any of the adults. Here, the 2 children, usually seen speaking gibberish around adults, were able to converse normally with each other, a narrative device used in Nickelodeon's hit 90s series The Rugrats, which likely inspired Cave Kids as a whole. Perhaps non-coincidentally, Christine Kavanagh and Elizabeth Daly, the respective voices of Chucky and Tommy from Rugrats, took turns voicing Bam-Bam. In 2001, Hanna-Barbera was absorbed into Warner Brothers Animation and Cartoon Network Studios, ceasing to exist. The Warner Empire took control of the Flintstones, and feeling the brand had become tired and dated, attempted to reboot it in the vein of the original series. The result was 2001's The Flintstones on the Rocks, a 60-minute telemovie produced by Cartoon Network Studios, which saw Fred and Wilma attempting to save their marriage. Produced in an over-the-top animation style, which lampooned classic limited animation, it featured incredibly crude, stylized character designs like many of the era's Cartoon Network series. It featured incredibly lewd and obscene humor, which, in its attempt to add edginess and maturity back into the series, many fans believe went a step too far. Filled with lewd jokes, sexual themes and innuendos, and straight-up gross-out humor, On the Rocks turned out to be perhaps the most off-brand Flintstones project ever created. It seems Warner's too realized they had crossed the line, with the special never airing again and refused a home media release. The project is notable as the final Flintstones project to have involvement from Hanna-Barbera, who, unsurprisingly, served as uncredited executive producers. Hanna passed away that year, with Barbera following in 2006. Another couple of attempts to bring a touch of edge back to the Flintstones were the 2003 episode of Harvey Birdman, The Dabber Don, which saw Fred in a Tony Soprano-esque role, and the 2004 episode of Johnny Bravo, A Page Right Out of History, which saw a stone-aged ancestor of Bravo meeting Fred and Barney in Bedrock. While these crossovers weren't as over-the-top as On the Rocks, the erratic madcap style of the Bravo series and the adults-only nature of Adult Swim's Harvey Birdman were still considered incredibly off-brand. In 2011, a new Flintstones revival was announced with Family Guy creator Seth MacFarlane at the helm, expected to launch on the Fox network in 2013. Fox said in their press release that the series would feature MacFarlane's modern-day take on the lives of the Flintstones and the Rubbles, and one can imagine it would have been similar in style to MacFarlane's Family Guy and cavalcade of comedy Flintstones parodies. Sadly, in 2012, The Hollywood Reporter revealed that Fox, despite having spent 2 years negotiating a deal with Warner's, had scrapped the series, saying that the studio and network brass who read the script were not thrilled, with suggestion by Deadline that MacFarlane's overcrowded schedule affected his work on the project. As a result, On the Rocks turned out to be the final Flintstones branded production for 14 years, until 2015's bizarre 50-minute straight-to-home media movie, Flintstones and WWE Stone Age SmackDown. The movie saw the Flintstones come head-to-head with prehistoric WWE superstars and divas in a modernized limited animation. Over the years, the Flintstones have additionally appeared in a vast array of extended media in various unique designs, including video games, 2000's Bedrock Bowling, and 2006's Bedrock Racing, which saw them appear in CG animation. The characters have also been the focus of numerous comic series, with one in particular printed by DC between 2016 and 2017, giving the characters a darker, edgier, more modern and realistic interpretation. As part of their Hanna-Barbera Beyond initiative, DC noted that their The Flintstones 12-issue limited run told of humanity's ancient customs and institutions in a funny origin story of human civilization, infusing the Flintstones with modern and contemporary concepts while keeping the heart and soul of the classic animation. In 2020, for the 60th anniversary of the original series, Boomerang launched Yabba Dabba Dinosaurs, a new age revival of the Cave Kids series. Much like Cave Kids, the series has a much larger focus on action and adventure, with stories focused around dinosaurs and other fantastical elements of prehistoric life from a child's perspective. Unlike Cave Kids, the adult characters do appear, albeit in limited roles. The series also retains a classic comedy aspect, albeit more in line with the slapstick juvenile humor of Flintstones Kids. Looking to the future, it's uncertain where the Flintstones will head next, though it seems Warners are adamant at making the franchise relevant again, with 2 new projects currently being circled. One being an adult-oriented reboot series, somewhat in the same vein as the MacFarlane project, being produced by Elizabeth Banks's Brownstone Productions, likely set for HBO Max, and the other a proposed theatrical animated film, though this project has been in a state of flux since 2014, with names like Will Ferrell and Adam McKay once attached. In 2018, Variety reported that the project is still in deep development, and one could imagine it's likely being prepped as part of Warner's planned Hanna-Barbera cinematic universe, which kicked off with Scoob in early 2020. However, it's unknown if the lukewarm reception to Scoob will affect the Flintstones production. I personally believe the Flintstones have plenty of life left in them. Having been inspired by age-old stories and having inspired many itself, unlike many cartoons, the Flintstones remain as relevant today as they ever did. As a satire of modern times, there are numerous directions a revival could take, with its brand of observational humor absolutely timeless and easily applied to any age or era as long as that original spirit is left alive. And at that, it's over to you. I want to know, what is your favourite Flintstones iteration? Me personally, how can you go past that original series? Yabba dabba, fire away in the comments below and let me know your thoughts. If this is your first time viewing one of my videos and you'd like to see more like it in the future, then please don't forget to hit that big old subscribe button up on your screen, as well as that like button down below for that little extra support. Also, don't forget to check me out on social media, and please consider supporting me over on Patreon. Thanks for watching and have a fantastic day.